The dining room was lit with 20 candles, each one a small, hopeful flame she had ordered lit herself. Lydia sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her hands folded over the letter that had arrived an hour ago. The paper had stopped trembling between her fingers. Now it simply lay there, as still as her heart had become. Unavoidably detained, do not wait. No signature, there never was. She looked down the length of the empty table, at the places set for two, at the crystal glasses that would remain unfilled, at the silver cloche covering the duck that would grow cold. This was her first wedding anniversary. She had married the Duke of Dunmore 365 days ago, and she had not eaten a single meal with him in 3 months. The clock on the mantel chimed 9. Lydia did not cry. She had stopped crying weeks ago when she realized her tears changed nothing. Instead, she stood slowly, blew out each candle herself, and went upstairs to her silent bedroom. She did not wait up. She did not listen for his footsteps. And somewhere in the darkness of Dunmore Park, a door closed that night that would not easily open again. She had not always been this quiet. When Lydia Hawthorne first came to Dunmore as a bride, she brought with her a smile that people called brave, a trunk of carefully chosen gowns, and a secret that sat like a stone beneath her ribs. She was the daughter of a respected but financially ruined baron, and her marriage to Marcus Devereux, the Duke of Dunmore, had been the scandal of the season. They had been discovered together in the moonlit gardens of Hartwell House, unchaperoned, her sleeve torn, his cravat loosened. Society had gasped. Marcus had looked at her with cold, unwavering eyes and spoken the words that sealed her fate. "We will marry. There is nothing else to be done." He believed she had trapped him. The truth was far uglier and far more tender, and she carried it entirely alone. The first weeks of their marriage were a study in polite, devastating distance. Marcus spoke to her as he might speak to a housekeeper he did not particularly trust. "Good morning. I trust you slept well. The estate accounts require my attention." Lydia learned his routines the way a naturalist might study a dangerous predator from a distance without hope of approach. He rose at dawn and rode across the moor alone. He took breakfast in his study with the door closed. He rarely appeared at dinner, and when he did, he ate in near silence, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the walls. And yet in those early days, Lydia tried. She tried because she believed that love, if offered humbly enough, might grow into something real. She asked about his tenants. She remembered how he took his tea. She left small posies of heather on his desk, a silent gesture he never acknowledged. She hoped that one day he would look at her and see not the woman who had forced his hand, but the woman who had quietly, foolishly, loved him from the first moment she saw him at a county assembly 2 years before. But hope is a frail thing, and neglect is a steady wind. The first real break came on a Sunday in late autumn. They had been invited to a house party at Lord Ashby's estate, and Lydia had dared to hope this might be different. She had worn a gown of deep blue silk, her dark hair dressed with pearls, and for a few hours in the drawing room she had almost felt like a true duchess. Marcus had even stood beside her, his hand resting lightly at her elbow, a gesture of possession that made her pulse quicken. Then she overheard the conversation she was never meant to hear. She had stepped onto the terrace to catch her breath, and the voices drifted through an open window above. "Dunmore looks positively chained," a woman said with a tinkling laugh. "That Hawthorne girl trapped him well and good." "I hear he cannot stand the sight of her," another voice answered. "He keeps to his study, she keeps to her rooms. There isn't even an heir in progress." "Can you blame him? She forced the marriage. Everyone knows it." Lydia stood frozen, the night air chilling her bare arms. Then Marcus's own voice cut through the laughter, low and careless. "One does what duty demands. The Duchess is an arrangement, nothing more." "Nothing more." She did not confront him. She did not weep in the carriage ride home. She simply stopped trying. The posies disappeared from his desk. The inquiries about his day fell silent. She began taking her meals in the small morning room overlooking the garden. She stopped lighting the candles in the dining room at all. If he did not notice, she told herself, that was its own answer. Winter arrived, and with it came an aching, hollow stillness. Dunmore Park was beautiful in its severity: gray stone, endless corridors, fires that never seemed to warm the rooms entirely. But Lydia had become a ghost within its walls. She learned to fill her days with small, purposeful things. She read in the library, not novels of romance but histories of botany and treatises on landscape design. She began walking to the village 3 times a week, where a foundling hospital had recently opened under the patronage of a charitable physician named Dr. Samuel Thorne. And it was there, among the children with their chapped cheeks and hungry eyes, that Lydia discovered a version of herself she had nearly forgotten. The Foundling Hospital was a modest stone building on the edge of the village green, perpetually underfunded and overflowing with need. Dr. Thorne was a man of perhaps 35, with kind, tired eyes and hands that were gentle even when they were hurried. He did not seem to care that Lydia was a duchess. He cared that she could read to the children, that she could hold a feverish toddler while he stitched a wound, that she arrived on time and never flinched at the work. "Your Grace, you have a gift for this," he told her one gray afternoon as she coaxed a spoonful of broth into a listless little girl. "They trust you. That is no small thing." Lydia looked up, surprised. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with simple, genuine warmth that she felt her throat tighten. "They are easy to love," she said quietly. "They ask for nothing but kindness." Dr. Thorne studied her for a moment. "And what do you ask for, Your Grace?" The question hung in the air. Lydia did not answer, but something in her chest shifted, a locked door easing open just a crack. She began spending more time at the hospital, slipping away from Dunmore in the early hours and returning only when the light began to fade. The staff noticed. The housekeeper remarked on the Duchess's charitable pursuits, and eventually, inevitably, the Duke noticed too. It was a Thursday in early spring when Marquis de Verle rode into the village on a state business and saw his wife through the window of the Foundling Hospital. She was kneeling on the stone floor, her gown dusty, her hair escaping its pins, and she was laughing. A small boy had thrown his arms around her neck, and she was laughing with a fullness he had never witnessed, not once, in all the months of their marriage. He reined in his horse and simply watched. She looked alive. She looked like the woman he had glimpsed across a ballroom 2 years ago, before the scandal, before the forced vows, before everything had curdled into silence. She had worn a pale green dress that night, he remembered suddenly, and she had smiled at him with such open, unguarded curiosity that he had almost crossed the room to speak to her. Almost. But that was before the garden, before the trap, before he had hardened his heart against her. Now, watching her with the children, he felt a sensation he could not immediately name. It was sharp and unwelcome, a twisting somewhere beneath his ribs. Then Dr. Thorne appeared at her side, handing her a cup of water, and the physician's hand brushed her shoulder with a familiarity that made Marcus's jaw tighten. He turned his horse and rode away without stopping. That evening, for the first time in months, he joined her for dinner. Lydia was already seated in the small morning room, a book open beside her plate, when the door opened and Marcus walked in. She looked up, startled, and the fork in her hand paused halfway to her mouth. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carefully neutral. She did not smile. "I thought I might dine with my wife," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. The footman scrambled to bring an additional setting, but the air between them was thick with unspoken things. They ate in silence for several minutes. Lydia did not fill the quiet with chatter as she once would have. She simply ate, her eyes occasionally drifting back to her book, as if his presence was a minor interruption to her evening. Marcus found this profoundly irritating. "You were in the village today," he said at last. "Yes." "At the Foundling Hospital?" "Yes." "With Dr. Thorne?" Lydia's fork paused. Then she set it down carefully and met his eyes for the first time that night. With Dr. Thorne and approximately 30 children, yes. Was there something you wished to discuss about the hospital, Your Grace? Her tone was polite, utterly correct, and entirely empty. It was the same tone he had used on her for a year. And in that moment, Marcus understood with a clarity that felt like cold water down his spine that she had learned it from him. I merely wondered, he said, his voice cooler than he intended, if it is appropriate for the Duchess of Dunmore to spend so much time in such a place. People talk. Lydia's expression did not change. People have always talked. They talked when I married you. They talked when I did not produce an heir within the first month. They will talk whether I spend my days in a hospital or sit alone in this house waiting for a husband who does not wish to see me. I prefer the hospital. She stood, her meal barely touched, and curtsied, a shallow, formal thing. Good evening, Your Grace. She left him sitting alone in the morning room, the candles flickering around him, and Marcus Devereux, Duke of Dunmore, felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He felt ashamed. The weeks that followed brought a slow, agonizing shift in the balance of their household. Lydia continued her work at the hospital, and Marcus found himself inventing reasons to ride through the village. He told himself it was coincidence that his business took him that direction, that he merely wished to ensure his wife's safety, that Dr. Thorne's easy manner with her was a matter of no consequence whatsoever. But the lie wore thin. One afternoon, he arrived to find Lydia and the physician standing close together in the hospital courtyard, their heads bent over a ledger. Dr. Thorne said something that made her laugh, that same bright, unguarded laugh, and then the doctor touched her arm again, just above the wrist, a gesture that lingered a heartbeat too long. Marcus felt his hands tighten on the reins. Before he could think, he had dismounted and was striding toward them. Lydia. She looked up, her laughter fading into surprise. Your Grace, is something wrong? The carriage is waiting, he said, his voice clipped. I've come to escort you home. Dr. Thorne straightened, his expression polite but guarded. Your Grace, he said with a small bow. We were just reviewing the hospital accounts. The Duchess has been instrumental in securing additional funding from several local families. Her advocacy has quite literally saved lives. Marcus felt the words land like a blow. He had not known. He had not asked. He had been so consumed with his own cold resentment that he had never once inquired what his wife did with her days. I see, he managed. Nevertheless, I require the Duchess's presence at Dunmore. Lydia's eyes flickered with something, disappointment, perhaps, or resignation, but she simply nodded, bid Dr. Thorne farewell, and allowed Marcus to hand her into the carriage. The ride home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was charged, electric, full of words neither of them knew how to speak. It was jealousy and the first bitter taste of regret. The breaking point came on a night of summer storms, when the wind howled across the moor and the rain lashed the windows of Dunmore Park with furious intensity. Lydia had retired to her rooms early, weary from a long day at the hospital, and Marcus sat alone in his study, a glass of brandy untouched before him, a letter from his steward spread across the desk. The estate was thriving. For the first time in a generation, the debts that had haunted Dunmore for decades were finally cleared. The mortgages were paid, the tenant farms were profitable, the future was secure. And Marcus had no idea why. He had inherited the estate from his father 8 years ago, along with a staggering mountain of debt that had nearly forced the sale of the ancestral lands. For years he had struggled to keep the creditors at bay, scraping together payments, selling off minor holdings, living with the constant, grinding fear of ruin. Then last year, shortly after his marriage, a miracle had occurred. An anonymous payment had arrived, an enormous sum, enough to clear the largest debts entirely. The source was untraceable. The bankers spoke of a trust, an intermediary, a benefactor who wished to remain forever unknown. Marcus had spent months trying to uncover the identity of his savior, but the trail had gone cold every time. Now, sitting in the stormlit darkness, a terrible, impossible suspicion began to form in his mind. Lydia's dowry. The Hawthorne family, though titled, was known to be impoverished, but Lydia's mother had come from a wealthy merchant line. There had been rumors of a substantial inheritance left directly to Lydia. Bypassing her father's creditors, Marcus had dismissed the rumors at the time of their marriage, assuming they were exaggerated. But what if they were not? What if the anonymous payment, the one that had saved his ancestral home from destruction, had come from his wife? His wife whom he had ignored for a year. His wife whom he had called an arrangement. His wife who now slipped away each day to care for orphans because her own home offered her nothing but cold silence. Marcus pushed back his chair and strode through the dark corridors to the east wing, where Lydia's apartments were located. He did not know what he intended to say. He only knew he needed to see her, needed to ask her, needed to understand. Her sitting room door was slightly ajar. A single candle burned on her writing desk, and there, in the soft pool of light, lay a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Marcus hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, his heart pounding with a dread he could not name. The letters were not his to read. He knew that. But the topmost one was already unfolded, as if Lydia had been reading it herself only moments ago, and the handwriting was not hers. It was a sharp, slanted script he did not recognize. He read the first line, and the world tilted beneath his feet. "Dearest cousin, you will marry the Duke of Dunmore tomorrow, and no one will ever know it was I who arranged your ruin." The letter was dated the day before their wedding. It was from a woman named Isolde Vance, a cousin Lydia had rarely mentioned, and it detailed, in chilling clarity, the true events of the garden at Hartwell House. Isolde had orchestrated the scandal. She had lured Lydia to the garden with a false message about her younger brother Edward, who was, the letter revealed, being blackmailed for a forgery that would have seen him transported to a penal colony. Isolde had arranged for the Duke to be there at the same moment, had torn Lydia's sleeve herself, had engineered the entire disgrace. And then she had offered Lydia a choice: marry the Duke and keep Edward's secret forever buried, or refuse and watch her brother hang. Lydia had chosen the Duke. She had chosen shame, coldness, and a loveless marriage to protect a brother who never knew the sacrifice she made. She had walked into the chapel on her wedding day carrying a secret that would crush her, and she had never spoken a word of it to anyone. Marcus's hands were trembling. He set the letter down as if it were made of fire and turned to the other papers on the desk. Bank correspondence, receipts, a letter from a solicitor confirming the transfer of an inheritance, Lydia's inheritance, into a trust established for the purpose of discharging the debts of the Dunmore estate. She had saved him. She had paid for his contempt with her fortune, and she had never, not once, asked for anything in return. And he had left her alone in a candle-lit dining room on their anniversary. The door to the adjoining bedchamber opened, and Lydia stood in the threshold, her hair loose around her shoulders, a wrapper clutched around her nightdress. She saw the letter in his hand, and the color drained from her face. "You were not meant to see that," she whispered. "Lydia," his voice broke on her name. It was the first time he had spoken it without distance, without coldness, and the sound of it seemed to startle them both. Why did you not tell me?" She stood very still, her hands gripping the doorframe. "What would you have believed? You already thought me a schemer. If I had told you my cousin trapped us both, you would have called it another lie. And if I had told you about the money," she swallowed hard. "I did not want your gratitude purchased. I wanted—" Her voice faded, but he understood. She had wanted him to love her freely, not out of obligation, not because she had paid his debts, simply because he saw her and chose her. And he had failed her in every conceivable way. "I have been a fool," he said hoarsely. "A blind, arrogant fool. Lydia, I read that letter on the terrace at Ashby's. I read it and I believed every word because it was easier to be angry than to admit I had been wrong. I called you an arrangement. I left you alone. I let you suffer in silence for an entire year." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, silent and steady. "You are not the only one who was foolish," she said. "I hoped for so long. I thought if I was patient enough, good enough, you would eventually see me. But you never did, so I stopped hopping. I stopped waiting. I learned to live without you, Marcus, and that was the hardest thing I have ever done." He crossed the room and fell to his knees before her, this proud, powerful duke, kneeling on the cold floor at his wife's feet. He did not touch her. He did not dare. But he looked up at her with an expression of raw, desperate anguish. "Do not say it is too late," he begged. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have given you nothing but loneliness. But I am asking anyway. I am asking for a chance to be the husband you deserved from the beginning. I am asking you to let me love you, Lydia, even if I have to spend the rest of my life earning the right." The storm raged outside, but inside the candlelit room, there was only the sound of her unsteady breathing and the thundering of his heart. Lydia looked down at him, her husband, her stranger, the man who had shattered her hope and was now kneeling in its ruins, and she felt something shift again, that same locked door opening a little wider. "You hurt me," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me feel invisible. You made me feel unworthy of even basic kindness." "I know," his voice was thick with tears. "I know, and I will never forgive myself." "I do not need you to never forgive yourself," she said softly. "I need you to be different. I need you to see me. Not the scandal, not the rumors, not the convenient arrangement, me." Marcus reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. Her fingers were cold, but she did not withdraw. "I see you," he said. "I see the woman who walks miles to read to orphans. I see the woman who paid my debts without a word. I see the woman who held her head high when everyone whispered, who lit candles for a husband who did not come, who kept a secret that would have destroyed her just to protect someone she loved. I see you, Lydia. And I swear before God, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." She looked at him for a long, aching moment. Then, slowly, she pulled him to his feet. They stood face to face in the dim light, two people who had been married for a year and were only now truly meeting for the first time. "It will not be easy," she warned. "I do not know if I can trust you yet. I have been alone for so long." "Then I will wait," he said. "I will court my own wife. If you will let me, I will bring you flowers and take you to dinner and listen to every word you say. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will spend the rest of our lives proving that you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Lydia searched his face, looking for the cold stranger she had married, and found instead a man raw with regret, his eyes wet, his hands trembling. It was not a fairy tale. It was not the love she had dreamed of as a girl. But it was honest, and it was vulnerable, and it was real. "All right," she said at last, a fragile smile touching her lips. "You may begin tomorrow." He laughed then, a broken, relieved sound. And for the first time in a year, Lydia Hawthorne, Duchess of Dunmore, felt the faint, tender stirring of hope. The next morning, a footman delivered a posy of heather to Lydia's sitting room. There was no note, but she recognized the flowers, the same ones she had once left on his desk, hopeful and unnoticed. She held them to her nose and breathed in their wild, honeyed scent, and when she went downstairs for breakfast, Marcus was already seated at the table, waiting for her. He rose when she entered, pulled out her chair, and asked with genuine interest about her plans for the day. It was a small thing, a simple courtesy, but after a year of silence, it felt monumental. The weeks that followed were a slow, delicate dance. Marcus kept his word. He joined her for breakfast every morning. He rode with her to the Foundling Hospital and, to her astonishment, began volunteering himself, awkwardly at first, then with increasing warmth, reading to the children and helping Dr. Thorne carry supplies. The jealousy that had once simmered in him transformed into something quieter, a respectful acknowledgement of the good work being done, though he still watched the physician with a proprietary glint in his eye that Lydia found both amusing and oddly endearing. They talked, for hours in the garden, in the library, by the fire at night. He told her about the weight of the dukedom, the fear of failure that had gnawed at him since his father's death, the bitter shame of needing a miracle to save his estate. She told him about her brother Edward, who had never known the truth and was now living quietly in the north, and about Isolde, who had fled to the continent when her schemes began to unravel. She told him about the long, silent nights when she had wondered if she would ever be loved. And he listened. He listened with an attention that was almost fierce, as if he was memorizing every word, every pause, every quiet admission. The emotional turning point came on a golden afternoon in early autumn, when they walked together to the village churchyard to visit the grave of an elderly tenant who had passed away. As they stood side by side among the weathered headstones, Marcus turned to her with an expression she had not seen before, a mix of gratitude, wonder, and something deeper. "I used to think my legacy was this estate," he said quietly. "The land, the title, the name, but I was wrong. My legacy is you, your goodness, your quiet strength, everything you have done for Dunmore, for the village, for me. That is what will endure." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. She reached up and touched his cheek, a gesture she would not have dared even a month ago, and he leaned into her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "I loved you too late," he whispered, "but I will love you for the rest of my life if you let me." She did not answer with words. She stepped closer, rested her head against his chest, and felt his arms come around her, strong and steady. And there, in the quiet churchyard, with the autumn leaves drifting down around them, the last of the distance between them finally dissolved. That winter, Dunmore Park was filled with light. Candles burned in every room, fires roared in every hearth, and the sound of laughter, real, shared laughter, echoed through the halls. Lydia no longer ate alone. Marcus no longer shut himself in his study. They hosted a Christmas celebration for the children of the Foundling Hospital, and the grand ballroom, which had stood empty for a decade, overflowed with small, joyful chaos. Dr. Thorne attended as a guest, and when he saw the Duke and Duchess standing together, their hands intertwined, he smiled with genuine warmth. He had known, perhaps before they did, that something profound had shifted. On the last night of the year, Marcus led Lydia out onto the moonlit terrace that overlooked the frozen garden. Snow dusted the hedges, and the stars burned cold and bright above them. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and pressed a kiss to her temple with a tenderness that still made her heart flutter. "I have a gift for you," he said, pressing a small velvet box into her palm. Inside lay a locket, simple and elegant, engraved with the heather she had always loved. When she opened it, she found two miniature portraits, one of him, one of her, and an inscription on the inner curve, "You were always seen." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I thought I would spend my whole life feeling invisible." "Never again," he promised, and then he kissed her, softly, reverently, as the bells of the village church began to ring in the new year. It had not been an easy journey. There had been pain and distance, and a year of silence that could never be reclaimed. But as Lydia stood in her husband's arms, wrapped in warmth and love and the quiet certainty that she was, at last, truly home, she understood that some things are worth the waiting. Some loves are forged in the broken places, and they are stronger for it. The silent Duchess had found her voice, and the Duke who had once looked past her now saw only her, and would for the rest of their days.